Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. If you like Bernie Sanders' message, you're going to love this new book, Runaway Inequality, an activist guide to economic justice. It explains how economic inequality developed, what it's doing to us, to our families, and our country, and it will certainly move you to action. Les Leopold is the author, and he's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for
It's
having
another
me.
great book. Did you plan to write a trilogy? I mean, that's basically what you've done, right?
Actually, it's the fourth one.
The
But
fourth
yes,
one,
No,
okay.
it's the third one on finance.
Well, I
that's
mean,
true. Yeah.
So it first started to explain the crash and what happened and how that did it. And then it was what, if you want to make $1 million an hour, you talked about how fund people and Wall Street people make so much money. And now we've gotten to see what that means.
Right. What I didn't get in the first two books was how our money gets to them.
That's
How do they,
interesting.
in other words, we have all these images of Wall Street being a big casino, but how does the money get into the casino? Where does it all come from? How could they get 40% of all corporate profits? There has to be some mechanism. And it finally hit home in this book that the mechanism is basically our productive assets are being financially strip mined. Money is being siphoned out of corporations and away from working people and leading towards this outrageous amount of inequality.
It's people, I think you're really saying also, people don't really understand how unequal it is. You use a CEO's salary as compared to a worker in that same organization or business, is the ratio. It's a staggering thing because when you ask people, they couldn't come near it, right?
Right. Well, it's amazing. There are these surveys done where they ask people, what does a top CEO earn per year? What does an entry-level worker earn per year? And the average American comes out to be a ratio of about 40 to 1. For every $1 earned by a worker, CEO earns $40. In fact, the real ratio is 829 to 1. It was 40 to 1 back in 1970. So that tells me that the American people's sense of justice is still frozen back then. That's kind of the world that they kind of think is fair, and it still exists. In fact, it's gotten completely out of control. They also ask them what they think it ought to be, and this is really interesting. Strong Democrats, they have believe it should be a ratio of 5 to 1. 5 to 1. Strong Republicans think the ratio should be 12 to 1, for an average of roughly 7 to 8 to 1. It's 829 to 1. So that tells.
Give me an example of a salary of a CEO.
Well, the average salary of a top 100 CEO in America today is something like $30 million, where the average entry-level worker is maybe 30,000, 32,000, something like that.
And that includes stock options.
Not only does it include stock options, but this is the amazing thing that's changed. Back in 1970, almost all of a CEO's compensation was salary and bonuses. No stock options, no stock incentives. Today, only 5% of a average CEO's income comes from salaries and bonuses. The rest is all stock incentives, stock options, and that's exactly, you put your finger on it, that's what changed corporate America, allowing a CEO to be paid with stock options. And that led to an incredibly interesting phenomena. Think for a second. You're a CEO, and mostly what you have are stock options. And this came as a result of this big deregulation that took place back in 1980 or so. What would you do? If you're being paid in stock options, what would you do? Well, CEO, they're not stupid. They're going to try to drive up the value of the stock. And one of the things that they're allowed to do, which is very hard for average people to understand, is they're allowed to use the company's money to buy back their own stock. Now, this is a difficult concept for some people because stock ownership, if you reduce stock ownership and everything else being equal, the value of the remaining shares have to go up. There's fewer of them. So they pour a company's revenues, pour it back into buying back their own stock. And I don't mean just a little bit. By 2006, they were using 75% of all corporate profits went to buy back their own stock. They could care less about research and development. They certainly
Right.
could care less about workers' wages. So a new game is afoot now.
It's a new bottom line.
Well, yeah, and it's a whole new process of corporate governance. The name of the game is buy back your own stock and drive up the value of the stock. They have all sorts of excuses to do it, but there's only one explanation that makes any sense at all, which is they want to put money in their own pocket. So that's how the wage gap went from 40 to 1 to 29 to 1 and still rising. Still rising.
Is there a movement in stock ownership when you have a stockholders meeting? There used to be a little bit of an action. What happens?
It turns out that all the hangers-on love this.
Yeah, because their stock is
Yeah,
going
because
to
what
go
happens is a private equity company or a hedge fund will go in and buy a big chunk of Apple or General Motors. They just did this with General Motors. And they said, okay, we want you to start buying back the stock and boost the dividend because we want to pump and dump. We want to get in, raise the stock a little bit and get out. We get in with, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then we get out and we make tens of millions of dollars overnight. So everybody's pushing the CEOs to do that, and the CEOs have now become absolute flunkies for Wall Street. They are completely wrapped up in this game.
Is this what you call strip mining?
Yes, because
it's the company takeovers also. It
right.
started.
They used to call them corporate raiders in our day.
Right.
Now they call them. They've come up with better sounding words. Private equity firms and hedge funds, they're the same thing. You go in and you buy up a company with almost none of your own money, you borrow a lot of money. And this is what's interesting. You borrow the money to buy the company, and you put the debt on the company. So it'd be like you go and buy a car, and then your car pays off the debt, not you. That's what they've got going. That's quite a scam, right? Your car pays back your debt, you don't have to pay it back. The company pays back the debt, they don't have to pay back the debt. The first thing they do after they buy the company is they give themselves a special dividend right off the top, out of the borrowed money. Then they change the way the CEO gets paid, and they pay the bankers that put the deal together. And the company is now saddled with this huge amount of debt, and the debt level's gone up exactly in the same slope as runaway inequality. Now the company has to pay it back. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to squeeze every cost they can. They're going to ship jobs overseas. They're going to cut wages and benefits if they can. They're going to outsource. They're going to sell off, weaker divisions. They're going to do everything they can to deal with the debt load and to boost the value of the stock. They're going to buy back the stock. Now, what do you do when you run out of profits and you still want to buy back your own stock? This is another trick they do.
You borrow.
You borrow more money.
Right.
So
And you're paying interest.
And you pay, right, and this debt load just grows and grows and grows on corporate America. And this actually leads to another connection that I had never come across before until this economist Michael Hudson pointed it out, which is how come Germany can have no trade deficit with China and the United States has a huge trade deficit with China? The workers in Germany get paid more than American workers. Auto workers there get more than auto workers here. Yet they have no trade deficit with China. They're in balance. Matter of fact, they have surpluses with most countries. The answer is, in the United States, the debt ratio on corporate on the economy is 192%. In Germany, it's like 90%. So there's literally. The United States, every product that we buy and sell is loaded up with debt. When you buy something from the supermarket or an item in a department store, approximately 30% of that item is interest payments, somewhere up and down the chain, where in Germany it'd be half that.
And so if you're a worker in this company and your wage hasn't gone up, and you go to buy a product, you put it on your credit card, and the question of debt, it goes to everybody, right?
Well, yeah, what's happened since the early 1970s is everything you can imagine has been, debt has increased. Debt is the product of Wall Street. That's what they sell. Indebtedness leads to financial strip mining. So consumer debt has gone up with the same slope. Student debt. When you and I were growing up, there was no such thing as student debt. You could go to college virtually free. Basically, you needed a summer job. A summer job could cover your tuition and expenses at many of the state schools all across the country. And in New York and California, it was completely free, tuition free. Now students have to go into crippling debt to just make it through college. And again, Wall Street's the beneficiary of this. So you've got this increased indebtedness corresponding with runaway inequality. But the driver of all this, it's runaway inequality is now the pervasive issue in our society that links us all together. We're all suffering under the weight of runaway inequality. The Occupy Wall Street kids were right, and Bernie's right. This is the issue of our day. The question is, what do we do about it?
So what do we do about it? But before we go to that, financialization, that was in another one of your books, right? My understanding was also, we don't have manufacturing jobs. Our gross national product now isn't product. It's basically money. Is that right? Am I wrong about that?
But this book came up, in researching this book, I came across this study done by the International Labor Organization, ILO in Switzerland. They have a whole bunch of economists there, and they were trying to understand, why did wages stagnate over the last 20 years? But they didn't stagnate equally in every country. So they had like a pool of 70 developed countries they could look at, and they tried to figure out why this happened. And they had the usual suspects. They had technology, they had attacks on labor and cutbacks of the government, and they had globalization. These are the things that we've all been talking about for. And then they threw in another one called financialization, which meant that the percentage of the economy that was just moving money around, just pushing money, doing financial services of one kind or another. And it turns out that only a lot of people say, oh, Americans don't have the skills, et cetera. Well, only 10% of the wage gap can be attributed to technology, about 25% to a tax on labor, about 15% on globalization, 45% on financialization. So the biggest, this financial strip mining and this pushing money around is the biggest reason for wages stagnating and runaway inequality increasing.
And this is all coupled also historically, the 70s and the 80s, to the move to deregulate everything.
Right. What happened was, this didn't happen by accident. This is not just like sort of a natural economic fact of life. What happened was a new philosophy came in the late 70s from the Chicago School, Milton Friedman, et cetera. And their theory was all this government interference in the economy is creating the craziness of the 1970s, which is another whole topic. And they said, what we need to do is deregulate business, get government out of the economy, cut taxes on the wealthy, and trim back the social services so that people have more of an incentive to work. You do those three things, you're going to get a profit boom, an investment boom, and all boats would rise. Well, what happened was...
And balance the budget. No, was that a part of it?
You know what? They never cared about that.
Yeah.
In truth, they never cared.
They talked about it. Yeah.
Somebody said that, but they never cared about that. What they cared about was getting the government as far out of... let private enterprise flourish on its own. Well, what happened was they basically undid, over the next 10, 15 years, virtually every New Deal regulation on finance that you can imagine. They just weakened it. And one of the big ones they weakened right away was it used to be stock manipulation to buy back your own shares. That's what they felt led to the 1929 crash, stock manipulation. So they said, you can't do that. But Reagan appointed a Wall Street guy to be head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he said, oh, no, that's not financial manipulation. That's just a good investment on the part of the company. So it all of a sudden became legal, went from illegal to legal overnight to buy back your own stock, and we are suffering. That's the key to financial strip mining, and we're paying for it now. So this whole, you still hear it. Ask yourself, when was the last time a politician said, you know what, if the private sector doesn't produce enough good jobs, we're going to have the government produce good jobs for the American people. For anybody who is able and willing to work, we're going to make sure they have a decent job. No politician has the nerve to say that anymore, because that whole philosophy of this deregulation, neoliberal, they call it philosophy, we call it the Better Business Climate model, it got bought by both parties. And every politician, almost everyone, including Bernie, isn't even crossing that line yet, and certainly Hillary isn't, of saying, hey, you know what? We're going to have to create jobs for people at the bottom.
Well, we've heard a little bit about it in transportation infrastructure, right?
Yeah, but that's not the same.
They never do it.
But that's not the same as saying, you know what? We're going to take a million inner city kids and we're going to have them plant trees all over the country to do something for climate change. What do we do instead? And this is the saddest result that we discovered through this book process, is instead of doing a real war on poverty, which we did for 20 years, good things happen, bad things happen, but we were trying, we decided to put people in jail. We put kids in jail. Right. So we have the largest prison population in the world. We also have the highest percentage of the population in prison. We are the biggest police state in the world. How did that happen? How could America become a police state and not even know it? If you look at the growth, it starts exactly at that 1980, exactly at the same time. We have a surplus population that doesn't fit in the economy. We put it in jail, and it's it has a disproportionate number of people of color.
So, and that affects not only the jobs, education, everything.
Everything.
Because suddenly
Voting.
it costs too much, right?
If it's a felony,
you can't
you can't vote when you come out, and you're marked for life. This also helps us explain something like Ferguson, Missouri, or what happened to Eric Garner in Staten Island. What was Eric Garner doing? He was working. He was selling loose cigarettes. That was his job. And it's criminalized, and he was put in prison. He was going to be arrested. He was killed. And Michael Brown and Ferguson, that's a different story, connected, which was Ferguson, and many of the counties around Missouri were struggling as a result of this runaway inequality. The other big feature of runaway inequality is when you get really rich, you don't pay your taxes. You move your money overseas. The rich pay a smaller percentage of their taxes and state and local taxes than the poor do. So Ferguson had a fiscal crisis. What did they do? They started arresting and hassling low-income people to collect fines.
To make the money to
and you
pay
can
for
see,
the government.
we have a chart in the book that shows revenues at Ferguson.
Right.
And Michael Brown got caught in the net and got killed.
So, I mean, now when you look at it, the theory of small government goes along hand. That's deregulation, right? Not protecting anything about it. The smaller the government, the freer we are to do the things we want to do. I mean, the repeal of Glass-Steagall and some of these financial measures just helped, right? I mean,
well, what you get is, look, government was always the balance against runaway inequality, and
after the crash in '29, that was what protected everybody.
Well, yeah, it was tremendous government regulation, as Piketty points out in his famous book now, that the tax system was used to put downward pressure on runaway inequality. So you even had a great communist like Dwight Eisenhower with a 90% top marginal tax rate on the super rich. Basically, there was a wage cap that you can't make over this amount or we're going to tax it away. So that's what brought runaway inequality was tamed all the way from 1933 to about 1980. And then this foolish, I think, completely foolish and cruel ideology, self-serving ideology came in, and now we have runaway inequality.
And this last crash didn't bring the same result that '29 brought.
Well, that's because the government's a little smarter in terms of how they intervened and how the Fed intervened. And we did have, the stimulus program, although not big enough. We kept the bottom from coming out. But the thing that we miss about this last crash is that since the last crash, there has been a recovery. But 95% of all the new income created during the recovery went to the top 1%. 95%. That's never happened in the history of the United States. Now that tells us, brings up two salient features that I think we need to understand. One, this is now a fact of life in the economy. It's not going to go away by itself. There is no pendulum that's swinging back and forth. Oh, now we have a lot of inequality, but don't worry, wages are going to go up like they did this last month a little bit, and runaway inequality is going to stop. No, it's built into the very structure of how we govern corporate America, or how we don't govern corporate America. So I think that's fact number one that the book proves. Number two comes from fact number one, which is you have to build a large, mass, popular movement to do anything about it. You can't win in our individual silos on this issue and that issue and the other issue. You need something broader, something that looks like the populist movement back in the 1880s. That was the last time that Wall Street's power was directly challenged. They said, that kind of banking system we don't want. We want public banks. We want a different kind of movement. And the way they tried to build that movement, I think, is going to be incredibly instructive.
Well, that's where you go to North Dakota with your public bank, right?
Well, it's interesting. One of the victories of the populist movement was by 1919, they got a public bank, the Bank of North Dakota. Now, there's some interesting things about that bank that I want to share with you. First of all, one comes from the following misconception that I had. So I'm thinking, when you pay your taxes, okay, you live in New York, and you write a check out, where does it go? Where does it go? I always thought, well, it goes to Albany, right? Don't you write Albany or something?
Into the general revenue.
Into general revenue. But you know what? There is no such thing called the general revenue. What it is a bank account at a large Wall Street bank. The only banks big enough in this country to handle tax revenues and do money management for a state is a Wall Street bank. $1 trillion a year in 49 states go into Wall Street banks and create a capital base for Wall Street, except in North Dakota. That money goes into the Bank of North Dakota, which is owned by North Dakota and the citizens of North Dakota. And the jobs are civil service. They lost no, by the way, it's also the most profitable bank in the country. They lost no money during any of the crises because they didn't play around in derivatives and all the funny money stuff. Their top, this is interesting, I called them up, their top CEO makes $250,000 a year, right? Can you imagine a New York banker?
No.
$250,000 a year. And their entry-level worker, full-time worker, is like $30,000. Comes out to be a ratio of 8-to-1, which is precisely what the American people think is fair. And a great thing about the Bank of North Dakota is they partner with community banks, 70 community banks, and they make loans, but they have a stipulation. For every $100,000 they loan, that company has to create one new permanent job in the state of North Dakota. They force them to create jobs here. Now, if we had 49 other state banks, it would change the ball game entirely.
It's interesting because here, if you develop something, you get public money if you say you're going to do, you're going to create 2,450 jobs, which is always ridiculous anyway. But it doesn't balance out to be a profit because you get a tax abatement for that. So we pay them to make the jobs. Right?
And then we don't even hold them to it when they don't make the jobs.
But we're going to run out of time. This inequality affects everything.
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 From housing, education, everything in our lives, right?
Correct.
And that's what's so basic in the book, I think, that you show.
Right. So when I'm trying, there's a chapter on each of those issues where I try to show the centrality of financialization and runaway inequality. And who I'm trying to speak to are the millions of people, good progressive people, that are in issue silos. I'm not saying stop working on your issue. I'm saying it's time to make those silos porous. We have to link together. We have to build a broad populist movement like the one in the 1880s, and we have to have a common agenda. It can't just be an issue agenda. So in a way, yes, the book is like silo busting. We're trying to, and one of the key lessons about silo busting comes from the populists. How they organized like crazy, but they also believed in education. Back in 1880, they had 6,000 educators going around the country telling the story, doing the analysis. And so that's what we're trying to do now. We don't have 6,000 yet. We have very few. But until all these progressive groups start doing education around a common analysis and a common agenda, we can't stop runaway inequality.
But the book has really been a primer, and it's being distributed all over. I mean, organizations and people are buying.
We're very fortunate.
Let's explain how you're doing this.
Well, we're working with a bunch of unions and community groups. They've already bought 22,000 plus copies. We're developing a training program where we're training their workers to be economic educators, and they're going to get time off from work to go speak to other workers about what's happening to the economy. And we hope to build out of this an anti-financialization movement that can do things in the short term, like Bernie's financial transaction tax to pay for free higher education, and longer stuff about getting rid of stock buybacks, make that illegal again, and a whole bunch of other things. So, we're trying to build a kind of grassroots economic education
So if somebody
movement.
wants to know more about it or contribute, how do they do it?
LesLeopold@AOL.com. It's at the back it's in the very back acknowledgments of the book, and they should contact me. We have people are calling up and asking for bulk orders just because they're in a group. A guy from Maine just bought 50 books, and we try to give him a very, very reasonable price. And if people want to buy it from us, we have a website called runawayinequality.org. We can give people free shipping. And it's at all their bookstores. It's on ebook, wherever you buy your ebooks, it's there.
And you're also going around and lecturing or teaching, basically.
Well, yeah, I'm running these kind of workshops for sometimes 200-300 people for 2 hours up to a day. I'm also going to be on a bunch of public radio shows and hopefully some TV shows like this.
And you write for Alternate also.
Alternate and Huffington Post.
So every time we've talked, and we've talked quite a few times, you've always ended it with this cry that it must be a movement. And you're finally seeing it.
Well,
beginning
I'm
to
finally
develop.
able to do something I think that will enhance it. There will be no movement without an educational program. The educational program is not going to come from the standard media. It's going to come from alternate media and from real grassroots education. We can do that.
Does not necessarily be, it's not changing the system to being a socialist system, is it?
Nobody knows what that means anymore.
Right.
It's certainly going to make the system much more people-friendly, and it's going to put a curb. Look, in
Switzerland. Back to the Roosevelt days.
Yeah, well, in Switzerland, they had a referendum a year and a half ago on a 12-to-1 referendum. Isn't it interesting they picked that number? That no corporate leader, a CEO, could make more than 12 times the average worker in a corporation. And they got 1 million votes for that in Switzerland. I mean, that's going to get tried out in this country. It's time to put a maximum wage on these folks, mostly guys, these guys. They're ripping us off blind. They can't spend the money that they're earning. It's ridiculous. They're caught up in it. You know, it's about ego for them. It's totally ridiculous. It has nothing to do with incentive. It has to, and they don't even understand how they're wrecking the country because they don't live in the same country with us anymore.
They buy an apartment for $50 million or a house for God knows how much.
They don't leave from our airports. They don't use our, you know, they fly around in their helicopters and private planes. Their kids go to private schools. They have no idea how the rest of us live anymore. And we have to do something about this.
And the Congress, that's another interesting thing, because it does come down to politics. You're not going to be able to do any of this until you elect people who believe in it, right? And the Congress has how many millionaires in it now?
Well, it's getting up there. I think it's 50%.
Yeah.
You know, that all has to change too. But the pressure has to come. You know, look, maybe Bernie will win, and that would be wonderful. But how is he going to change anything unless there's a mobilized mass movement? It needs a common analysis, a common structure, a common agenda. And I think this book has some of that in there.
Yeah, I think so too. So we've come to the end, but you'll have to come back again.
Be my great pleasure. Thank you.
And we have to follow you as you travel around the country. I just am so thrilled at the idea that this is happening. So thank you, Les Leopold.
Thank you so much.
Okay. If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.